Well, I want to begin by thanking everyone for joining us on this Thursday afternoon in May here. I'm Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and we're fortunate and so lucky to be joined this afternoon by Stu Osthoff, the publisher of Boundary Waters Journal and a longtime fishing guide here in the Boundary Waters in Quetico. Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness has been around for nearly 50 years, and there are three pillars of what we do: wilderness, people, and community. We protect the wilderness, we connect people to the wilderness, and we support the communities that are gateways to the Boundary Waters here. Some housekeeping items here. At the bottom of your screen there, you'll see a Q&A button and a chat button. You can put questions in there. We'll have Stu answer those at the end in a chat function if you want to add comments. Perhaps you want to let us know where you're from there, or say hi to Stu here. Stu is a legend in the Boundary Waters. He has published the Boundary Waters Journal. I have right over here, the Boundary Waters Journal here, for over 30 years, and he has had a Grand Slam guiding service in the Boundary Waters in Quetico for equally as long. And so he is a wealth of knowledge. Fishing opener is upon us here. Ice out is pretty much upon us, but not completely, but it's ice out is, if it's not here on all lakes, it's certainly coming to all lakes pretty shortly here. So as an organization, we're you are our supporters, are the strength of our organization. We don't forget it. And people who love the Boundary Waters like Stu are part of that community of people who love the Boundary Waters. So we're going to talk fishing today. I'm going to pull up some photos that Stu has, and I'll share the screen here now, Stu, with your program on it. And so we're talking fishing with the fishing opener upon us right now, and Stu has a number of really nice photos here, and I'm gonna we'll start off with that one, Stu. So Stu, take it away, and thanks a million.
Okay, thank you. So back in March, there's a big canoe show in Madison called Canoeacopia, and my booth for the Journal happened to be right next to the Friends booth. And Peter Marshall was the guy running the booth. And I think he got tired of hearing me talk fishing for 3 days and figured out that maybe your membership would be interested in some of what I was talking about. So here we are. So yeah, for the last 37 years, my wife and I have published the Journal, Boundary Waters Journal, right here in Ely, from a log cabin 5 minutes from the Gabbro Lake entry point. So we live out in the woods. And then because I do the guiding all summer as well, I'll be guiding 7, 8 to 10 day trips again this summer. Most of them very oriented towards fishing. We live it. We don't just write about it. We really live this stuff. We've published hundreds of in-depth articles on every aspect of fishing Quetico and Boundary Waters over that nearly 4 decades. So, it's hard in an hour to distill all of that down into something that, we can handle, but I'll do my best. But I guess what I would say is if you want more detail, you can either subscribe or go to our website and tap into all those back issues with those articles that really drill down deep into all this subject. So yeah, like you referred to, the A topic right now is the ice out. Are we gonna have to drill a hole to go fishing Saturday? My little lake by me, 10 miles south of Ely, Blueberry Lake, that went out on May 3rd, which is 15 days later than the historical average. So this is 5 out of 6 last years that we've had a late ice out. I just talked to my rural mail carrier on the way in this morning, and he said Shagwa went out and Burnside had ice yesterday and not today. So Burnside is usually the last Ely area lake to go. So once Burnside's out, you can pretty much rest assured that everything else is open. I don't start my canoeing and fishing till next weekend because it's a Canadian trip, and the Canadian opener is always 1 week later than the Boundary Waters, Minnesota opener. But for those that are coming up, now that I'm starting to see a few boats and canoes going through town here, a lot of people will go in the woods tomorrow and then be ready for Saturday. So yeah, it's clear sailing on the ice, but it's been nip and tuck the last several years. So yeah, I thought I'd start by showing some photos because I want to hammer home my point. And my whole approach to fishing the Boundary Waters in Quetico is that wilderness fishing is first and foremost canoeing, like you see in this shot. Can we move to the next photo, or do you do that, or do I have to do that?
I'll move it down here.
See if you can advance it one. So that's shows guys loaded and locked and loaded, headed off canoeing there. But my point is, first you got to paddle, portage, and camp. Then and only then do I talk about fishing, because if you fish along the way, you'll never get to where you're going to go with time and energy to what I call hardcore fish. So there are people that will throw a lure out behind and paddle from camp to camp and call that fishing. I call it just a wish, and that's not the way I approach fishing. I get where I'm going to go, and then I make camp, and then I go fishing. In fact, we carry our rods in a case. A, they're expensive and we don't want to break them, but B, it's to prevent that fishing along the way mentality. So yeah, as a BWCA angler though, I crave a lot of the same wilderness values as the non-angler. There's the beauty, the solitude, the adventure, that camaraderie, looking at the wildlife, that sense of challenge. That's all a part of my trips as well. It's very important for me to emphasize that. It's just that fishing is an add-on to that and lets me transcend what I call the pure paddle trip. So, you know, for those that love to fish, this is a great place to pursue that. For those that don't, that kind of explains, you know, my approach to it's just adding it to the mix of what you already enjoy so much about a canoe trip up here. There are a lot of unique appeals to fishing the Boundary Waters in Quetico. First of all, there's hundreds of lakes that get very little pressure. There's no roads, no float planes, no boats. It's just pure wilderness set aside for the canoe angler. Where else can you find that? Not very many places. You have that variety of fish here. I call it the Grand Slam, meaning smallmouth, bass, walleye, pike, and lake trout, but there's also largemouth bass. So really there's 5 species. So the beautiful thing about that is if one species is kind of in the doldrums, you can usually switch over to something else and still get some action. But basically, canoe country fishing to me boils down to this. You're talking world-class angling for cheap. The rub is that instead of paying a lot of money to fly into some exclusive lodge, you're paying your dues with the pack and paddle. I call it sweat equity. So you're fishing water that most people, you know, they can't even imagine having a lake all to themselves when they're used to bumping into other boats on a drive-in lake. So, you know, that whole space out there and the solitude and the whole quality aspect of the angling experience is huge to me. Few, if any, have paddled and portaged more up here than I have, but I forget about all the tough portages and the miles of paddling. It's those encounters with big fish that I'll take to my grave. So as much as I love the whole canoeing thing, it's those special fish that I really remember. I fish for the challenge and the thrill of the game. I don't fish for food. On my trips, I'll have, this 8 to 10 day trip. I allow one meal of smaller walleye per trip. A lot of the people in the friends are everybody should be well aware of the approach of minimum impact camping and leave no trace. I just extend that same principle to my fishing. I mostly do catch and release. I never kill a bass, a pike, or a trout. I just eat walleye once a trip. That's that. So I brought along my little bag of tricks here. Let's move this. Can we see that? One of the myths that drives me crazy. Oh, you can advance to a few pictures there, Chris. This shows a shot that you're looking at of foraging through the mud, which we're all familiar with. Oh, you went backwards.
Responding immediately here, Stu. I'll keep.
There should be like a paddle. You went backwards on that, or I'm seeing the first shot now.
Yeah.
You can just scroll ahead a few, but I'll keep moving here. So this is one of the myths about canoe country fishing is it's good enough to just take one little tackle box. No. Because I'm a guide, I have to take more than a normal person because I have to back up 7 or 8 clients. But this pack weighs 25 pounds. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, that's a good shot of pulling over for a canoe break there. It's probably a 3,500 cubic inch pack. And I have everything in there that I need for fishing. On the top, I pack my reels because like I told you, my rods were in a case. So I have my reels, 4 of them in a padded case, because deer takes a beating on the portages. So I'm going to just take this out. So here's the first box. This is topwater smallmouth. That's it. That's all topwater smallmouth lures. I'm going to show you a few of my favorites later as we go. But then I have a box of Vibrax spinners. This is my primary subsurface smallmouth lure, so I have a lot of them. Color's not as big a deal as the size. Notice they're big. They're number 5. So then I have a lake trout box. We'll talk more about that. And then we got, I'm going to have to stand up a second here. They're stuck in there. We just packed this all up for my trip starting out. My favorite walleye lure is the jointed shad wraps. I have a box of them. Then I have some shallow crankbaits for bass. And then I have regular walleye crankbaits like other shad wraps and things. So that's what, 6 different little tackle boxes. And then on the side, I have all the things that you put on a jig, the soft plastics and the gulp type lures. In Quetico, there's no live bait allowed, so you have to use artificial stuff like that. So I'll get into detail a little more on those. What was that? Okay. So take plenty of tackle, don't scrimp on that. I mean, even if you have to have a full day pack like that, it's worth it to be locked and loaded once you finally get out there and start fishing. So I thought I'd go through my seasonal approach to how I fish, kind of how I target the 4 species as the spring and summer unfolds. That way you guys can see timing is everything in this game of fishing the boundary waters. You know, the presentation and the tactics you use have to fit the time period that you go on your trip, and they're very different in May versus July or August. Very different. You'll see that. So we'll start with lake trout because they're an early season fish. A lot of people, is that mine? A lot of people, excuse me. A lot of people that have fished up here for years have still not caught a lake trout. I get that all the time. Boy, I'd like to catch my first lake trout. In the springtime, May through mid-June is probably the best time to do that. I used to do trips, what I called ice out trips. As soon as the ice went out, I'd go out of Mudrow up through Wagosh to Friday Bay, across Crooked and into Argo that way. That was before the park even opened. You had to pay by credit card and all that. But that got really risky. There were a lot of trips where we actually, had to chop through ice and shred our paddles to get to where we wanted to go. So now I kind of backed that off a couple of weeks. Good thing, because the last few years it'd have been a no-go on May 10th. So with lake trout, they prefer 50-degree water. Of course, when the ice goes out, that's everywhere. It's 40 something. So I tend to target most of my trout activity from mid-May to mid-June. And typically they're going to be 20 to 40 feet deep. During that time, I want to get out something here. So the traditional way of fishing lake trout out of the canoe in the boundary waters has been to troll a spoon. And my favorite spoon has always been the Dr. spoon. This one is a size 285, probably 4 inches or so. Can you show me what I'm showing? Is that what they see right there? Yep. Okay. And so for the last 30 years, this has been my standard approach. You would let that out 100, 120 feet behind the canoe, and I would prop my rod under my left leg and paddle on the right, while my bow guy had his lure running out the right side, so we're tangling less. And with those, with the Dr. spoon or a Daredevil type spoon, you would often troll an hour or two without a bite. I mean, that was common. It was a lot of paddling and trolling and fishing per strike. So when you got one, it was something to celebrate. But we did catch a decent number of nice trout on that. Well, about 3 years ago, Tom and Terry Kloss started writing articles for the Journal about their lake trout fishing and their methods. And it blew me away to realize how little I knew about lake trout fishing after having attempted to do it for so long. So my primary focus is bass and walleye, but I've always been interested in the trout, and like many others, I catch far less trout than the other species. So I was all ears when they started doing this, and come to find out, they don't troll much at all. They use what's called a lipless crankbait. So where a Rapala lure, would have a big plastic lip to make it dive when you cast it or retrieve it or troll it. These have no lip. They are about a 1 ounce lure. So they sink like a rock right to the bottom. And they got so proficient at perfecting this technique, they were catching a lot of 3 foot plus lake trout in Loch LaCroix, mostly with these. So I decided I got to get in on that. Well, then about that time, the lures they were using became obsolete. So they decided they would make them. And so we are now selling these in the Journal as a kit of 5. And this thing was a game changer on lake trout last year. Every single one of my clients, and I'm talking 40 something, caught their lifetime biggest lake trout on that lure I just showed you. The way you fish it, because it's 1 ounce, it sinks to the bottom. You let it go. You let your line go out till it hits bottom. And then you just kind of fish it like a walleye jig, really. You just lift it and let it go back to the bottom. So you'll notice it has a little, just a tiny little spinner blade on there, and that really flashes. When you let it go back down, it flutters. The whole body flutters. It kind of simulates a Cisco or a Tulabee, which is a primary forage for lake trout in the canoe country. So that one, it just has the purple color, the 1 ounce, and that configuration, the shape of the thing. It's just a killer on lake trout. I mean, we were catching 10 per morning out of my canoe versus 1 or 2 with the spoon. So that's, you can get them through the journal. What else did I want to say about lake trout? Okay, as far as, so electronics are really handy for lake trout. I have them, but I rarely use them. I never use depth finder for bass and walleye and pike. But for lake trout, it's nice to know, especially as the water warms up, where the deeper water is. But for me, I just go next to where I think the deeper water is or where I've caught lake trout before and just start jigging with that thing now. Some of my favorite lakes on the BWCA for lake trout, I don't know if we can go over to the map, but you guys probably mostly know, they're the border lakes, Saginaw, Knife, Basswood. Crooked doesn't have trout, but Loch LaCroix. And then there's little lakes like Thomas, Fraser, Oyster up the Fern Echo Trail. Fraser, Thomas, Ima, Kekakobik's really good for big trout. In Quetico, I like Jean, Antoine, what else on my list? Susanette, Agnes, Booba, Argo. You know, those deep, cold lakes have the bigger lake trout. I don't even fish lake trout in August. I pretty much quit in July. They're so deep by then. If you do catch them, and you can catch them by doing the techniques I talked there about, their air bladder tends to inflate as you bring them up and they decompress. So they're hard to catch and release. You have to burp their belly, make them burp audibly to get that to deflate so that they can swim back down. It's not a low stress thing. So I give up. If you're going to catch lake trout, you should probably plan on keeping them and eating them if you're doing it in August. One thing I would say about lake trout is they kind of capture the essence of wilderness fishing more than the other trout. You only find them in wilderness type habitat. You don't see them in central Minnesota, for example. So they kind of are special that way. And they do get big. There's no greater thrill in canoe country fishing than a big lake trout on light tackle in a canoe. We're literally battling them for 30 minutes and they move the canoe around. I mean, they're super strong. A lot of big trout will not feel that big until they see the canoe. Once they see the canoe and they realize what's up, they power down to the bottom, and that is strong fish, really fun. I better move on from lake trout. Smallmouth, that's the reason that I am here. Boundary Waters Journal and my guide service would not exist without the smallmouth. And of course, the irony is they're not native to the canoe country. They were put in along the border lakes in like the 20s and 30s. Even the DNR got in on it. So that probably wouldn't happen today in the age of invasive species. You're seeing some pictures here about the camping and the wildlife. Why don't you move ahead, Chris, to where the fish show up? Wildlife, there's a wolf, the loons. It's all part of my trips as well. And just scheming on the maps, that kind of shows my fishing tackle contents there. Okay. See if you can find, okay, stop there. Here's some guys that are landing what I call the perfect eater walleye up on sturgeon. Let me catch up to you here there. I'm thankful for the smallmouth. They're the kind of the primary obsession on most of my trips. Most of my clients come from the southern states, and they're all into bass fishing, and it's really fun for them to do it on the Canadian Shield lakes. So I'm a big bird hunter and big game hunter, and I love to hunt the shoreline cover for smallmouth. It's just a really visual style of fishing, much more engaging than trolling the deep for walleye and trout. So I got my client fishing from the bow there, and I've got me paddling in the back, and I have my rod ready to sneak a cast in now and then when I see a spot. But what we're looking for is shoreline structure that would hold those big bass. Sunken logs, trees that have burned or blown into the water. They love getting under there. Any weed beds or weedy patches, inlets of current water spilling in. What else? What I call boulder flats. Like sometimes you'll just have an erratic boulder the size of a VW bug just sitting there. They love getting in the shade behind a boulder like that. But boulder flats are more of a coming out away from the shore where it stays 10, 15, 20 feet deep, and there's scattered rock down there. Smallmouth love to feed on crayfish, and crayfish love rocky rubble, like rocks the size of basketballs or bowling balls. So don't overlook those. And then they love sand and gravel for spawning, which the end of May, that's what they do. The males create a spawning bed, maybe 3 foot oval. They'll thin off the sediment, and with Polaroid glasses, it'll look like a light colored spot. And you can cast to them, and those 18-inch males will usually nail whatever you throw in there. The bigger females will be staging just off in deeper water. They just come in, lay their eggs, and leave. They're done. The male does all the work about rearing the young and all that. But when you're casting, so let's say we're going up the shoreline. I like to go around the lake clockwise because as a right-hander, it's easier to cast off the left. So the guy in the front fishes to what if the bow is 12 o'clock, I have him fish from 10 to noon, and then the rear guy fishes behind him, so you're both fishing different stuff without tangling and whatnot. But you got to watch out that the canoe doesn't get to those good spots and spook them before you cast to them. So I like making fairly long casts, especially with top water. I'll show you what I use here in a second. We don't have time to go into all of the different little wrinkles, but basically, if you target those types of spots that I'm looking for, you'll find plenty of bass, especially in late May through June when they're in that shallow zone all day long. You can fish high noon and do really well at that time of year. So what do I use? As the season starts, I'm mostly throwing a subsurface Vibrax spinner, a number 5. I like them with a bucktail. You see that up there? Turn the spinner here. Color isn't a big deal. I guess if I had my druthers, it'd be brass or copper. I like the dressing on the thing. But like yellow like that is really good. They're all number 5s. Everything in my box is a number 5. Pike really like these, so you know, I don't like using a leader, but you can. You'll lose a bunch of pike if you don't have a leader, but that's my number 1 go-to smallmouth lure. And if they're not hitting top water, I'm pretty much throwing that. It'll run 4 or 5 feet deep. You throw it into that same structure cover, but you know, you can't throw it quite as shallow. When the bass finally do warm up, the water warms up and they want to hit on top, I start going to top water lures. And for many years, just like trolling trout with a spoon, I relied on the toppers for, like this is This is an X-Wrap popper from Rapala, the cup model. But I've pretty much gotten away from that. This is called a Whopper Plopper. It's made by a company called River to Sea. And it's a prop bait. So I see how the rear third of the lure rotates. The whole lure rotates like a propeller. So there's no cup on the front. I can't get that. There's no cup on the front like a popper, but it's a floating lure. Throw it out there and it just sits there. And so then I would just retrieve it. You know, I'd pull it like a foot, and then that prop or that back end, when it's not stuck, churns and makes bubbles. And the neat thing about topwater is it attracts fish with noise and vibration that would never see it just by itself visually. So you're attracting a lot of fish. This is called number 90. This is the one I use the most. It's an awesome lure because you can throw it. It's heavy. You can throw it a long way. When the fish get more aggressive on top, you can go to the 110. Same lure, just a little bigger. You can throw that even farther. River to Sea Whopper Plopper. That's my number one top water smallmouth bait. Largemouth love it too. You will get a bunch of pike on them too. Pike like them. You can't use a leader on that or it impairs the action. But a lot of times the pike will just break it off and it'll float back up. You can go over and pick it up again. So that's the two lures, subsurface and topwater, that I like for bass. One thing about bass to remember, if you're coming in July or August, the big bass are going to be deeper during the day. So you'll probably strike out throwing to that shoreline cover. You'll only get little fish. But in the evening, they will come in to feed on that shallow water. So like say from 7 p.m. to dark, you'll get some bigger trophy fish coming in. So kind of eat your dinner early or real late and fish that prime evening time period until dark, especially later in the season. For smallmouth, you cannot beat the big border lakes for boundary water side. Again, sag, knife, basswood, crooked's awesome, and Loch LaCroix. I mean, if I had to do a smallmouth trip in the B-dub, that's where I would go. Yes, you have wind issues out there at times, especially for topwater. That negates the option of fishing topwater. You just gotta wait till evening. It almost always calms down. Fish something else during the day, walleye or trout. So let me know when we have like 10 minutes left so that we got some question time. So then, so keep that in mind if your trip is later. A lot of my bass fishing is May and June, which is a little different than later in the summer. Quetico, I have my lakes, Sturgeon, Antoine, Jean, up in that sector are kind of my favorites. Let me get rolling here. Let's move on to walleye. Maybe advance, Chris, to some of those fish pictures so we can show people kind of what the goal is here. I'm not a Minnesota native, so I don't have walleye in the blood like a lot of people, but that's a big time. Here's a picture of me cooking walleye. That's a big time favorite up here. They're challenging. Sometimes there's a lake trout I caught on the Klossler last year. Sometimes it seems like that's a big trout we got on the Klossler last spring in Argo. Okay, there's a bass with the Whopper Plopper, nice 22-inch smallmouth. Forget where that is. I think it's called Stu's Lake, an unnamed lake. That one's on basswood, another big smallmouth. All right, stop there. That's a walleye, 29-incher. My client got on Conmy last year. So the walleye, it seems like the stars need to align for them to bite sometimes. They can be challenging. And other times it's like candy from a baby. They're a funny fish. most of the time, people in the boundary waters like to take in some bait. Packing and portaging crawlers and leeches is kind of a pain, but they do work if you want to put up with that. They're not allowed in the Quetico, of course. So we've gone to other stuff, but you can still use bait and it works if you're willing to put up with it. There's nothing better in the than the walleye in the frying pan. But like little walleyes aren't all that great a fighter, but bigger fish like the one you're looking at there, they're strong and very fun to catch and release. So big walleyes are fun. Most people do use a jig. You all know what a jig looks like. And then, most of us put like a twister tail on them like that, or they have the paddle tail, And then there's scented lures like the gulp stuff, like that's a gulp minnow. So whether you're in boundary waters and don't want to mess with bait, this is great, or in Quetico where you're required to, this is what we're putting on our jigs. You try to fish it like live bait, obviously you have to impart the action to it. It doesn't wiggle like a real leech, but they work, not as well, but it's the next best thing. I am not a big jig fan. Let's see here. I like casting or trolling crankbaits, and they work really well in the evening. So this is a shad wrap Rapala jointed number 7. I like yellow, anything with blue on it, like off of there, like so, that's good too. Crayfish color looks good. So you can cast this out, it'll run about 10 feet, or you control it that 100 feet of line out behind you. This is especially good in the evening when walleyes come in from deeper water into like a narrows or a point or an island or reef. This is really good in that last hour or 2 of daylight to fish that when those bigger fish are more active. Up on Canippy in 2019, I tried this lure and just ripped them up, and they went nuts for this. This is a jointed BX swimmer Wapala, number 12. It has a small lip, doesn't run real deep. Just had a lot of 25-inch walleye hitting this on Canippy now. Then COVID hit and I haven't been back. I'm anxious to get back there this summer and try that again, see if it was a fluke or not. I did catch a few last year elsewhere, but not like I did on Canippy. What else about walleye? I think we pretty much covered it. Some of my favorite walleye lakes that you can get to pretty easy would be Stewart Lake in the Boundary Waters, Crooked, Heritage Lake off Shell Lake, Iron, Fort Town Horse, Basswood, Ensign, Insula is really good, Gabbro, Alice. A lot of people I know are going into Alice this weekend for walleye. In Quetico, I like sturgeon, poobah, Brent, Conmy, Burt, and Canippy. As far as pike goes, I don't really target them. We just catch them inadvertently casting for bass most of the time. Caught a lot of big pike on walleye jigs too, just kind of by accident. One thing about big pike, like people think, well, you got to fish weed beds for pike. True enough, but you'll only get smaller fish there once the water gets hot. Big pike need cold, well-oxygenated water. They go deep in the midsummer. So you're only going to catch little pike in the weed beds as a rule. But they're fun to catch. Toothy devils steal a lot of lures. I laugh about putting my kids through college on what I spent on lures because of pike. So many days during the midday, I'll fish walleye and trout and then switch over to bass and walleye during the evening prime time. Depends on when you're out there. Like I said at the beginning, there's always something to try for depending on the conditions. I actually quit fishing boundary waters in August. I guide brook trout trips to Hudson Bay then because it's really cooler up there and it's a different kind of, it's a canoe trip, but it's a fly-in thing where you go down a river. It's tough fishing here in August. If I could leave you with one thing to remember, it's if you can at all do it, come and fish up Boundary Waters, Quetico, May, June, July, not August, September, October. I do an October trip mostly for fall colors and wildlife and no bugs, no people. But fishing is really, really tough. The idea of fall fishing bite has eluded me. I'm not into that. Fishing the Quetico and Boundary Waters, to me, the whole wilderness canoe trip experience is about engaging with nature, but fishing lets you do that at a deeper level. To me, it's almost like a spiritual fulfillment to go out there, and all the planning and scheming and dreaming we put into these trips, and to actually catch some big fish. It's really rewarding to do that. It's a lot of fun. It's challenging at times, and there's days when the weather and the fish don't cooperate, for sure. I mean, I'm out there 60 days. You're gonna have downtime. You just are. You're not gonna bite like you want them to every time. So that's what I had prepared, Chris. Let's go to some questions, hopefully. Otherwise, I can keep rambling on. If anybody's got something specific that I brushed over too much or something they're wondering about, I'd be happy to see what we can do.
Great. Why? Thanks so much, Stu here. And yes, we have a number of questions in here. Maybe I'll start from the top here on if you want to ID your favorite lure of all time for walleye and northerns. It sounds like it's changed over time, perhaps. So, but maybe what's your favorite walleye?
Well, for
lure?
walleye, I mean, when my kids were going, we'd put a leech on their bare hook, and that way they could catch something whether we were sitting, blowing, or drifting, or trolling. I mean, they had a chance with live bait. So for kids, you can't beat a leech. But, once Quetico in 2008, they banned live bait and barbed hooks. So we had to go to the soft plastics on the jig to stimulate live bait, minnows or leeches. But that shad wrap, jointed shad wrap, I don't think you'll find a better artificial lure for walleye. Does that cover it?
Yep, that covers it. We have a question here from Jeff. Are there any good musky lakes?
No muskie in the Boundary Waters, Quetico. Vermilion Lake near Ely has big muskie. It's big water. You can canoe out there and try for them, but most people use a boat out there. It's near, you can actually go into the Boundary Waters from there into Trout Lake. But to my knowledge, there's no muskie in the wilderness per se. And you fish them a lot like pike, but I've never caught a muskie in my whole life.
And do you guide for fly fishing?
Do I guide for it?
Yeah.
It's awesome for smallmouth. Can't really do it for lake trout and walleye, but pike and smallmouth, they love flies. And the thing about fly fishing, let's say you're a fly fisherman and you find a buddy to go with you, he's pretty much a trolling motor, because it's hard for both of you to fish simultaneously. Just the, likelihood of hitting each other's lines with somebody fly fishing and all. And you have to command and control that canoe more with a fly fisherman. But there's nothing more fun for me as a guide than to watch a surface fly being attacked and a fly fisherman who knows what he's doing, fishing for bass and pike. That's fun. It's definitely doable, but you need a good stern man to fly fish.
For folks on the line here, we are going to record this and we'll share the recording with you. So for folks that have asked that question and want to make sure to catch all the details, we'll send that out and you'll have this information. we do have a question here from Paul, and I think one of our listeners may have responded to it. But you were talking about some of the top water lures there, and I think the second one you mentioned was from by river to sea, right? Maybe you want to repeat the two top water lures you were talking about there.
Yeah, sure. Where is it? Can't find it. It's a relatively new lure. It's the Whopper Flopper. River to Sea is the manufacturer, but the lure is called the Whopper Flopper. It's the one with the rotating propeller in the back. I've given up poppers. I talked about the popper, the X-Rep pop from Rapala, but this lure is all you need for topwater bass up here. It's just awesome in so many ways. You can throw it a long way. It's tough. You can bounce it off the rocks. It just makes a lot more. It's way easier to teach and learn than the popper. You just reel it and stop, pause for a second or two, pull it a foot, just lift and keep reeling, keep a tight line. I even collect all my line before this hits the water, because sometimes bass will hit it so fast, you'll swear they saw it coming in the air. There's no other explanation for how they could jump on it that quick. That is the thrill of topwater fishing. I like yellow mostly because I can see it. Because we're fishing those late evening hours and I throw it into that shade, I can see where it's at. It's just a really fun lure to fish. There is no more fun way to fish anywhere than topwater, especially up here. So yeah, that's what I use for bass, and pike love it too.
Stu, we have another question about dealing with the time of year. So a mid-September trip, what tips do you have for someone taking a mid-September?
Well, a lot of times mid-September is still summer August mode. We've had several articles written lately about fishing that time period, so they could look into them for this full story. But moving water is the place to start. For walleye and bass, anywhere where one lake's dumping into another or a stream coming in, that would be number one spot. But a lot of times it's just like fishing in August. You got to fish the evening hours, because on hot, sunny, calm days, walleyes will be comatose and they'll move in the evening to feed. So it's sometimes in mid-September you can get the cool down. So like late September, the lakes do what they call turnover. All the warm water on the top gets that nighttime cooling, and eventually it's heavier and sinks and pushes the warmer water below to the top. And when that happens, you get all that turbidity in the water. Your water filter will plug up in an instant, and the fish are tough to catch then. So mid-September, just think the same as August, summer mode, pretty much.
We have a question from someone who wants to fish some brook trout in Missing Lake and some of those lakes out there. What time of day and depths do you have for brook trout?
You know, as much as I love brook trout and do that trip to Hudson Bay every year, I've never brook trout fished in the boundary waters. There are lakes, most of them over by the Gunflint side, that are managed for brook trout. I'm not even sure if they're still stocking brook trout. I'm not sure on that, but they're in there, and most people go for them in the fall and in the winter. Then there's Splake, which is a brook trout, lake trout cross. I'm not an expert on that. I'm not the right guy to ask that question. I do know guys target them with flies, what's called the hex hatch. They'll go in and fly fish the big caddis flies for brook trout on boundary waters, lakes. And that's usually like July, mid-July. That's all I really know about it. Ely does not have a bunch of brook trout. There's like high and dry. Some of the lakes on their very periphery of the BWCA have brook trout. But I don't really know. I can't give you firsthand experience on Boundary Waters brook trout. I'm fished out by the time I get to brook trout, I guess. They are
Okay.
a fun, beautiful fish. They're pretty aggressive and they're bold. They're pretty easy to catch once you find, where they are.
You had mentioned one of the subsurface spinners. Who makes it? There was like a Vibrax spinner you were talking
The
about.
Vibrax spinner,
Right.
that's it's owned by Rapala. It's called Blue Fox Vibrax spinner. Most people are familiar with MEP spinners. It's very similar, only it's heavier and it has a different hub that vibrates and attracts more fish. So I had like 200 MEP spinners that I eBayed. Once I found the Vibrax, it's better in my view, and I go with it. That's what I use on those brook trout in Hudson Bay, but smallmouth, if they're not hitting on top, Vibrax number 5 is my favorite lure. A lot of stores carry 1s, 2s, and 3s for stream trout fishermen. You almost have to go to a Cabela's or Bass Pro to get the 5s.
Okay, great. We have a question about handling bugs here. So how do you handle bugs in June?
Bugs in June? So like in early June is the black fly hatch. They breed in moving water. DEET is not super effective on them. It lasts a little bit. You gotta have a head net. They're the ones the little gnats that bite you behind the ear and you bleed. And so usually when you're out on the lake fishing, they're not too bad. In evening in camp, they'll descend on you and kill you. They're short-lived. They're like 2 or 3 weeks. First half of June, they're really bad. Right about the time they start to dissipate, the mosquitoes come out. And DEET works well on them. But if I get to a gnarly portage, I'll have my head net in my life jacket pocket, and I'll put that on and off as needed for the mosquitoes and black flies. So I actually take a screen house, because so much of my fishing would go right to dark. So now we get back to camp, the mosquitoes are killer. We go in that screen house, I cook on a gas stove. And by the time I get dishes done and camp tidied up for the night, it's midnight. So that screen house is a lifesaver. So that's one bug defense that most people don't think is worth portaging. I do, and my guys love it. We can socialize and eating there in peace and fish our schedule without worrying about the bugs so much. But when you're out and about during the day, head net and DEET, not much else you can do. Usually when the black flies are out in early June, if you wear a light synthetic shirt, long sleeve, it's not too hot. So you're pretty much covered except for your head, and the head net does it. You can get, for $10, a really nice black head net, sea to summit. And now what I'll do is even spray a little DEET on the head net instead of on my body. And that keeps them at bay better. Don't put DEET on your fingers and touch fishing lures or line. Bad scent, and it'll actually, corrode the paint finish and line. Don't touch anything with DEET. So spray DEET on the back of your hands and do this. Don't just put it on your fingers. Do we have any more pictures or no? Is that it?
I'm going to share a few more as we end here. So I have you holding up like a 29-inch walleye. It looks like, I think here. Do you see that?
Yeah.
There. Then
gotta let those go. Big fish are made to let go. A lot of Boundary Waters Quetico anglers are very conservation oriented. Strictly catch and release those big mature breeding age fish, but you got to handle them with care. Take a net that's big enough, keep them in the water, get the camera ready, quickly pull them out, get your photo, get them back in the net, revive them till they're ready to swim off. We use, I don't know if it showed up on the computer, but all my hooks are barbless, even for Boundary Waters where it's not required. Way less stress on the fish with barbless hooks. You'll lose a few more fish, but it's worth it. Are we out of time?
We're near the end of our time here, Stu. super grateful to you, super grateful for my colleague there, Ozzie Reef. Stu and Ozzie are in our Ely office there. Thank you, Ozzie, for your help there, buddy. Thanks for helping us out here. So
Well, it's a pleasure to help support your organization and talk to your membership. I guess the thing, we didn't even scratch the surface. I'm still learning every trip, and I've done hundreds of trips. So it's a lifelong learning process, but a lot of fun, adds a lot to every canoe trip.
And people can, there's a lot of good information right here in the Boundary Waters Journal. Stu's talking about 10 myths in the current issue here, and more good information by the other writers there. In
fact, the next issue I have a article on my favorite lures for each species, a little more in depth than we had time for.
Perfect. And I want to remind everyone that right now we have our open water spring fundraiser here that goes from now until May 21st there, and all gifts will be matched up to $25,000. So please consider donating. You can take your phone up to that QR code you see, and you can go right to the link there, or you could type in the link that's on the screen there. And it is your generosity that makes Friends of the Boundary Waters possible here. And it's the generosity of folks like Stu here, sharing their time here that really makes our organization run. So thank you, Stu, for sharing your time and knowledge. Thank you for everyone that's on here. We'll again share the link of the recording with you. And thank you, Ozzie, for helping us out there up in our Ely office there. So everyone have a great fishing opener and a great day here. So thank you so much. Again, thank you, Stu. Everyone have a great afternoon. Goodbye.